All right, welcome everybody to another video. This one's going to be another tier list. And since I did Pokemon starters last time, I'm going to be doing the games that they come from this time. So I'm going to be having some criteria this time because I know that I didn't set any on the last one, and I do feel kind of bad because it was mainly just a bunch of personal bias and some competitive viability. I was kind of all over the place with it. So I do apologize for people who wanted to have a higher stakes on this one. But with this, I'm going to be looking at how innovative the games were. I'm going to be looking at their post story content, and I'm going to be looking at how I personally felt playing through them. Now, started off, let's say, not Fire Red, sorry. We're going to go with Red and Blue. I'm going to place the games that are together, like Fire Red and Leaf Green, for instance, will go on the same tier because they are, the same, essentially the same game, with exclusive Pokemon in between. So, like, Sword and Shield will go in the same tier, Scarlet and Violet will go in the same tier, and so on, so on. Basically, if they release together, they will go in the same tier. Except for third version exclusives like Platinum. That is going to be a different story. With that being said, let's jump right into this tier list. We're going to start off with Red and Blue. And I can't really say that they are great games. They haven't held up over a lot of the years, especially the mechanics of the game are really shaky. So I got to put them in C tier. They did a lot for the series in the start of things, and they actually got a lot of people to come out and actually play Pokemon. And not to mention, it started off as a pretty fun little idea for the genre at the time. So I will give them C tier for being one of the most sold games in history. In Pokemon history. Now, Pokemon Yellow. D tier. Pikachu is not really a great starter, despite the fact that they went a more story-appropriate route with the game. I mean, cool. But the fact that they made a Dexit Crisis in the second game, and this isn't even, that far into it, makes me feel even worse. Especially considering the fact that you can't catch Ekans or Coughing because of the fact that Jesse and James have them, or Meowth. That's a rough one. So honestly, I'm just going to have to leave this as a D tier. Now, with the originals of Gold and Silver, A tier. Not to mention, so they brought in, if I'm not mistaken, Dark and Steel types into this generation. And I do love them a whole lot because I did enjoy playing through Gold and Silver whenever I was younger. They were great games. However, I cannot forgive them for the drastic... I can't forgive them for the drastic level curve that they had. They had some pretty decent stuff innovating into the game, and not to mention with the adding of 2 new types, a lot of new Pokemon, and that nature. Now that I think about it, most of the new Pokemon weren't even available until the end game. Oh, jeez. Plus, the scarring of Whitney's Miltank makes me angry. B tier. I'll put them in B tier because of all the stuff and issues that they had, but while being innovative, they still had tons of issues. Pokemon Crystal. D tier. Despite the fact that now you have a choice of being a girl in Pokemon games, they had a very horrible thing to do, which was, if I'm not mistaken, this was the game that took out the Mareep evolutionary line, and I will never forgive them for that. So in that case, banished to D tier that they go. Crystal was a worse version of Gold and Silver. Had some innovation, but not enough to take it out of its horrible set place. Sapphire and Ruby. A tier. The designs of Pokemon are pretty solid, not to mention the post-game and the games themselves are pretty great. But the way that it is currently is just not peak perfection yet. We are getting there, but not quite. I will put them in A tier because of the fun experiences that I've had with the games overall. And Emerald unchallenged, goes into S tier. The Rayquaza side plot, along with the extra additives that they put into the Emerald version of the games, was a great experience overall. And not to mention, you actually got to be, a little bit different in your playthroughs with all the extra Pokemon that were added. That being said, we're moving on to Fire Red and Leaf Green. I'm putting these in B tier. They were pretty great Pokemon games, and with the third generation graphics and the updated to a lot of the stats and stuff, it made it a whole lot easier to deal with the 8th gym. If I'm not mistaken, that was the Psychic Gym. So they did innovate on it, and they made a lot of good changes for the games. However, I personally did not enjoy the Kanto region because it became extremely bland as you got through it. So I'm just going to leave them in B tier where they belong. Diamond and Pearl. Ah, jeez. B tier. And I'm going to put them over Fire Red and Leaf Green. Diamond and Pearl were my first experiences with a Pokemon game. And that means that this is going to be extremely biased for my part. I do like them, but I'm not so blind as to put them up into S tier. I know they have a ton of issues, especially with the, not availability for fire types. Especially considering that Chimchar and Ponytail were the only ones available. And on top of all that, the underground was basically useless, so it wasn't even that very much innovative. But the physical special split, along with the decent storyline and the Cynthia scarring, and not to mention the addition of Glaceon and Leafeon, I will put it in B tier. It is pretty good at games, but there is one more that goes above them. Platinum goes into S tier. You get more fire types along with the more availability of even more Pokemon, especially with the Origin Form Giratina right here, as you can see, which is really great. So honestly, I'm all down for it. And Heart Gold and Soul Silver, going S tier with it. These games have great content, and not to mention they have a whole lot more availability for Pokemon. And on top of all of that, I personally just enjoyed these games overall. They were great, fun little remakes. And they were done right. You have more content in the post game. You were able to catch more Pokemon. Not to mention it had the little walking Pokemon thing, which is like right here in the little bottom right of their pictures. It was a unique little gimmick. I'll give it that. It wasn't something that everybody used, but at least you got one. And clearly, I do have some bias for these games, but the level curve is still garbage, and Johto is not exactly one of my favorite regions. But I can't deny how good these games were, especially on the innovation front of things. Black and White. A tier. Fight me on this. I like Generation 5. It was a fun, innovative direction for the series, and there were a lot of people that decided to hate on these games the moment they came out, and I despise that. I don't like the fact that there's a lot of people that were gatekeeping these games from a lot of people, despite the fact that pretty much almost all the old Pokemon weren't available until around the end game. They gave a sizable new generation of Pokemon for you to play through with and enjoy. You didn't have to play through with the same Pokemon that you've been playing through for all of these previous games. You got to enjoy a whole new region of Pokemon. The same thing with Ruby and Sapphire. You got to enjoy most of the new Pokemon before you had to deal with many of the old ones. And Black and White 2, S tier. The availability of Mareep and Riolu, and plus with Elekid and Magby, not to mention with the redesigns for the gyms, and with Iris being the next champion. Honestly, great games. I love them. Plus the depth behind the story were pretty good. Especially with all the gym leaders pulling up to fight the sages near the end game. That was nice. X and Y. A tier. These games... Oh, sorry. I did not mean to put you in S tier. X and Y. I love these games. Now, there were some pretty fun little features that were added in. Especially with... Let's see. What in particular was added in this generation? Mega Evolution, for one. which was a great gimmick, and it was the most, I guess, fan derived games, if you can get that. The fans love these games because of the fact that Mega Evolution was introduced in them. However, they did not like a lot of the stuff that was in them, and I do feel kind of the same. But busting out rollerblades instead of running shoes was a really fun thing until you got the bike. Not to mention with all the different ways that you could shiny hunt for Pokemon, on top of the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, there was a decent size of things that you could do after the game was completed. And fighting in the diner for the bomb mushrooms were really fun. Not to mention, this was my first game that I got a shiny Eevee in, and I will never forget those moments that I had. So A tier. I know they're not perfect, but at the very least, I enjoyed them. I'm putting the Oras games in A tier as well, because they did not recreate from the Emerald format, and I'm not happy about it. They pretty much did a copy paste with a few exceptions into the Ruby and Sapphire games, which was really sad because I was hoping that they would follow the Emerald plotline and go straight for it, but they didn't, unfortunately enough. But regardless of all that, we can move straight on into the next series here, which is Pokemon Sun and Moon. I'm putting these in B tier. A whole lot of unskippable dialogue and cutscenes, but otherwise pretty decent games. Not to mention a really interesting amount of new Pokemon that came into the series, but this isn't the best of the series yet. I'm putting Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon in A tier. Decent challenge, and Ultra Necrozma was a really big threat. Not to mention, with the addition of Necrozma entering the game, Duskmane and what is the other one? I can't remember. I can't remember Lunala's version of it. Plus, if you remember the games, you also had the the call mechanic to shiny hunt for Pokemon, which was a pretty fun little addition to it as well. So both of these games had the call mechanic and everything, but I personally enjoyed Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon a whole lot more. But Pokemon Sword and Shield. The fact that most of the good Pokemon in the game were locked behind DLC twice makes me angry. And on top of all that, that shows that they could have added these Pokemon into the games. They just chose not to. And with the Wild Zone being the way that it was a pretty cool little iteration. And not to mention, you got to have access to a lot of Pokemon via the raid wells at the beginning of the game. So you could have a pretty cool little team. But despite all that, there's still flaws. And the story doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I'm putting them into C tier. They were games that I enjoyed, but they are not good Pokemon games in their own rights, besides the DLCs later. Pokemon Legends Arceus, A tier. A brand new direction for the series, and a whole lot of people actually really did enjoy this entry. There were some issues with the game, but it wasn't that bad. I loved Cleavor as a Pokemon. It is a really cool addition. Plus, giving Basculin a evolution to Basculegion and making Quillfish have an evolution into Overquill was a really nice design. Plus, the starters all got their own variations of forms from the region. And not to mention Braviary, too. I mean, there were some really good design Pokemon in this. Plus, the iteration of being able to have... How do I even say this? They were innovative in their own right. But, unfortunately, it's not a masterpiece because they were developed alongside Scarlet and Violet, which will be going into C tier. A lot of bugs, a lot of stuff that happened in the game that ruined my experience playing them on the Switch. But despite all that, and now with the DLCs being out as well, they had a lot of problems. But I did enjoy the ability to free roam and go wherever I wanted, and to be able to actually enjoy the region itself whenever the game wasn't lagging and having issues. But I can't forgive the game for all that it did with the bugs, the glitches, and a lot of the post-game content was mainly centered around a school. So I don't really enjoy the fact that I had to constantly go and do a lot of challenges and things that made it feel a little bit tedious to get all of the newer Pokemon. Well, sorry, not the newer Pokemon, the older Pokemon that everyone loved. With that being said, Legend ZA is not on this list, which does suck because if I had to rate the game from where it is now, I would place the game in A tier, along with Arceus. It is an innovative new direction for the series, gave a lot of new megas to Pokemon who really needed them, and hopefully with the DLC there will be even more Pokemon that'll be added into the list. Hopefully my boy Flygon gets an evolution. I am hoping, because I've loved Flygon for several generations, but he keeps getting neglected by Game Freak and all the other Pokemon developers. It makes me sad. But anyways, guys, that would be my tier list. And thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and see you later.